Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Professor Dan Presents his shaggy head, talking about things that maybe have something to do with ethics in a way that will hopefully be useful for you somehow. Today, I'd like to present to you the video entitled Bad Moral Theories. In this video, I'm going to walk you through first steps of moral analysis, which is to look at common things that people believe are good ways to figure out whether something is good or bad, and how those don't really work from a philosophical perspective. So let's get started, shall we? I think the first thing I'll do is take my glasses off so that you don't have to look at the glare off of the screen. How about that? Okay. So, why do I want to spend some time on these things? When people come to an ethics class, they usually come into the class with some good idea about what is right or wrong that they already have in their own minds. Most people believe themselves to be morally good people. I remember once upon a time reading an article in a magazine. For those of you who don't know, magazines are those things that you would see at the doctor's office. They'd be all piled up there, and you would look at them, and they would tell you about stuff that maybe happened one time. Because where else would you want to have a pile of things that everybody touches other than a place where everybody goes for medical care, right? Yeah. Anyway, one of these magazines was called The Atlantic, and they had an article once where they did a survey. And they asked some huge number of people, like 20,000 people, who believe that there's a place for you to go when you die, which is determined on or by how well you lived your life before you died. Good place and a bad place. Not to be confused with the show The Good Place, which is a really excellent show that was on NBC and you can get on Netflix now. And you could just watch that show and it'll basically teach you everything you need to know about moral theory. Anyway, when they did the survey, something like 99.5% of people who believed in an afterlife destination based on their moral worth thought that they were going to the good place. Now, when I saw that, I had two thoughts. Thought number one, did all those people think they were going to have all that company? And thought number two, I wanted to find the 0.5% of people who thought there was a bad place and thought they were going there, because, you know, those people would be a good time, right? Anyway, most people believe that they're good people, and they think they have a way that they can figure that out. Unfortunately, the common ways that people have for figuring stuff out don't tend to work from a philosophical perspective. That is, they don't tend to stand up they don't tend to be able to produce arguments which are sound or which are cogent, because they rest on premises and so forth that just don't work outside of that group of particular premises. Right? An argument in philosophical theories of ethics, we need arguments which are believable and which lead therefore to sound or cogent formations. That's what we're looking for there. So most people then, they have one of four theories that they use. And I'll write them on the screen here. Bring this whiteboard back up. I'll go ahead and erase all this stuff here. So, four theories that people have are religious theories, cultural relativism, subjectivism, and egoism. These are the four basic ways that people try to figure out how they know whether they've done a good thing or a bad thing before they have the marvelous insight of a philosophical ethics class to help them realize that there are better ways to justify your moral actions. Now, before I get into this, I want to make one thing really abundantly clear. The fact that you were following a theory that doesn't work from a philosophical perspective, that doesn't make you a bad person. Sometimes when people take an ethics class, because they already think they know the answer to the question, what is good and how should we behave and stuff like that, when they find out that the way they came to that answer doesn't work very well, they sometimes get very upset. It's as if they're being told, well, you didn't have a great theory, and so therefore you must be a bad person. So let me assure you, I want to assure you that the fact that you were following a bad theory, that does not make you a bad person. All the bad things you do make you a bad person, but not the theory. So there you go. You're welcome. All right. So let's start out then, and let's look at our first theory. And our first theory, as I pull up my, pull up my screen here. My first theory that I'm going to look at is religious theories, or my God said so. So a lot of people come to morality through their religion, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that. Religions have rules. Lots of people have heard of things like the 10 Commandments and so on. And they say, okay, well, if my religion says it's good, then it must be good, and I follow my religion, or I follow it mostly when it suits my purposes. I mean, I follow it totally all the time, not just when it suits my purposes. Anyway, my religion says this and that is right and wrong, and so that's how I know things are right and wrong. Now, that's all well and good if you're talking about stuff that's pretty obvious, okay? So if you think to yourself, well, I'm not going to kill people because my religion says killing people is the wrong thing to do. Okay. Thanks for that. Good for you not killing people. We appreciate that. Bigger problems are going to come up, though, when we start getting into moral situations where simply appealing to the religion isn't going to work. And that's really for one of two, even three reasons. One, if you're basing your moral views on religious rules, a lot of times those rules were written a really long time ago, okay, before we had certain things. For example, these here interwebs. No biblical rule about the interwebs because there were no interwebs back then, right? So you have that obvious sort of issue, but that's kind of a trivial issue. More important issues with religious theories of ethics are these two. One, how do you know what the God wanted you to do? Well, the answer, of course, is people say, well, it's written down in this sacred text. Well, okay. How do you know that the people who wrote the sacred text got it right? So I like to do this little bit sometimes in my in-person classes. I'll say, okay, so let's say you are following the 10 Commandments and you die, and it turns out that you had picked the right God. Good for you. You get up to your intake interview and God says, okay, well, how many people did you kill? You say, well, wait a minute, I didn't kill anybody. God says to you, what do you mean you didn't kill anybody? I gave a rule. I said, thou shalt kill. And then you say, well, no, wait, no. I thought thou shalt not kill is the rule. And God says, oh, Moses, sorry, he got it wrong. But, rules are rules, so I guess I'll have to go. You wouldn't know that the rules were correct until you died. So that's not really a great justification then if you're trying to make an argument for moral actions in the world now. The other problem, of course, is that there is more than one religion, and they might say different things. So if they say different things, again, how would you know which one is correct unless you died And having to die to prove your point is not really a great way to prove your point. And so that's why religious theories of ethics tend not to work. Now, our next group of theories starts out, well, it might seem like it has a similar problem, but there's actually two slightly different problems. This is cultural relativism, or how we've always done it, and how we've always done things. So right here, I have this picture. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar, these are soccer fans from back in the day when this is what it was like to go to a soccer match, or as the rest of the world incorrectly calls it, football. So in case you're curious to know what it's supposed to be called, it's supposed to be called soccer because that's what Americans call it. And when Americans call something something, then that's what it is. You're welcome. So here we see some British soccer fans. I think they're having a fight with some Swiss soccer fans because that's just what people used to do at these matches. All right. And people who are advocates of cultural relativism, they'll say, well, you have to have society determine what's right or wrong. You can't have some other standard which doesn't. But there's two big problems with this. The first problem is that societies change over time. So if once upon a time it was okay in English soccer to bring 2x4s and lead pipes and darts, that was one of my favorite, was darts, to the matches to hurl at and to strike the fans of the other team with while drinking 19 pints of beer and incessantly singing silly soccer songs. Well, now we don't think that's okay, right? So when you go to a soccer match in Britain now, at least a Premier League match, there's none of that. Most people would call that progress, okay? Most people think that that's a little bit better than what it used to be. But if we have progress, then what we're really saying is that other thing wasn't any good, and that's why we had to improve on it. But if cultural relativism is true, then how can you say that, right? It was just, this was good then, and now this is good now. But then why would we have changed? Like, what would cause the change unless we were going from something worse to something better? So the idea of moral progress doesn't work for relativism. The other idea the other reason relativism doesn't really work is because you could have two different cultures with two different perspectives on the same action. So let's say that the English soccer fans think bringing 2x4s to international matches and hitting the fans of the other team with them is good, and the fans of the other team say, no, it is not. Well, you have two different cultures, they have two different perspectives, but the action hitting fans of the other team with a 2x4, that's just one action. So if cultural relativism is correct, then the same action would be good and bad at the same time, and that violates the law of contradiction, and you cannot, in fact, violate the law of contradiction, and so that's why that theory also does not work. Now, next up, we have a theory which is similar. It's sort of like cultural relativism for one, and we call this theory subjectivism. This is based on how I feel. So what's morally good is what I feel is good, and what's morally bad is what I feel is bad. Okay, so this, of course, has the same problem that cultural relativism had, insofar as you can have two people with different feelings about the same action, and that would lead to a contradiction. The other problem, of course, is that your feelings can be what we in philosophy call wrong. That is, they could be just incorrect. So I have up here a picture of people protesting their children not dying of easily preventable diseases because they don't want them to be vaccinated because they have feelings about vaccines. Now we have what we call really outstanding scientific evidence that vaccines work very well. And we have also really good evidence that all the problems that people think are associated with vaccines are in fact not. If subjectivism is true, though, then you can't talk about this sort of stuff. It's just a matter of feelings. But how can you make a coherent argument if you don't have actually verifiable facts? As you cannot take a moral position based on things that are just untrue. Nothing would make any sense at all if you could do that. And that's why subjectivism, again, doesn't work out. One more theory to do, and then we can move on. And that is one that, to a lot of people at first, actually doesn't even seem so much like a moral theory, but it does sure come up a lot. And that's the theory of egoism. This is, again, a theory based on individuals, but it's different from subjectivism in this important respect. Both egoism and subjectivism are centered on the individual. But for the egoist, what is morally good is what benefits me, the person taking the action. And what's different about that from subjectivism is what benefits us is something we can actually measure and verify, right? It's something that we can demonstrate. So there's some external, more objective way to tell, well, this does benefit me or does not benefit me. So for example, one of the things that used to be popular for people to do once upon a time, I know a lot of people watching these videos are going to be future healthcare providers. It used to be very popular for people to smoke cigarettes. In fact, the majority of adults in the country used to be cigarette smokers. In fact, here's a weird factoid for you. 100 years ago, it was so many people were smokers that it was considered impolite of you to host people in your own home and not offer them ashtrays to smoke their cigarettes, even if you yourself were a non-smoker. It would have been rude of you to not allow smokers to smoke in your own home 100 years ago. This is actually written down in etiquette books, like the first editions of Emily Post and stuff like that. Right? Now, it turns out that smoking is actually bad for you. So an egoist could not make the following claim. It would be to my benefit to be allowed to smoke wherever I want, like people used to do in the 1950s, and really actually to a large extent up to the 1990s. I should be able to smoke on airplanes, and smoke in restaurants, and smoke in bars, and smoke in my office, and smoke in the elevator on my way to office. Or, that's actually not to your benefit. So it doesn't work for an egoist because smoking is actually harmful for you, so you are not, in fact, benefited by it. That's the big difference between an egoist and a subjectivist. However, the egoist falls into the same trap that the relativist falls into, insofar as you can end up with actions having contradictory analyses. Right? So if I'm somebody who's trying to sell, say, I'm trying to sell cars, it's for my benefit to sell a car with the biggest commission. But that doesn't mean it's to your benefit, the customer, to buy the car that's going to give me the biggest commission. So if I use sales pressure tactics to get you to buy a car you can't afford, it benefits me, but it harms you. The egoist would say, well, then it was right for me, but wrong for you. But again, the action selling you a car is just one action, and the same action cannot be both good and bad at the same time. So that's the four main theories that people come in with. Right? Most people, when they come in to an ethics class, they use either their religion or their culture or their own feelings or their own benefit to determine right and wrong, and it turns out that that does not really work out. So in future videos, we'll look at theories that do work out. I want to say one more thing. It's really important here, man, to stress the following. Every legitimate moral theory is going to say that basically the same group of things are wrong. You can't murder people or steal stuff. You can't be a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles. Stuff that's really obviously bad no matter how you are going to look at it. Why that's the case is going to be different. And in each one of these cases, there's going to be a way that we can make a sound or cogent, and the style of argument we're making, a sound or a cogent argument to back up what we're saying. It doesn't mean we're always going to agree on the outcome or the analysis, but we'll at least be able to make these arguments in a way that anybody could believe. So in the next several videos, that's what we'll be doing, is looking at theories which do work. Then we look at theories which do not work, which were religious theories, cultural relativism, subjectivism, and egoism. So that's it from the shaggy head of Professor Dan for this edition of videos that Professor Dan is making, which he hopes are helpful and that you're actually paying attention to. And he wishes you good luck and happy discussing.